Let me take a moment and talk about Riverside.fm. It allows you to record studio quality audio and up to 4K video. When you need to record audio and video, Riverside.fm can do it. So if you're looking for a hero platform for all your recording needs, from podcasts to webinars to any video content, Riverside.fm. I've got a promo code for you where you'll receive a 30% discount on the first 3 months of your subscription. I'll give it to you twice. The promo code is SHIPIT. All one word, SHIPIT, and you'll pick up a 30% discount on your first 3 months of your subscription. Riverside.fm.
In this episode of Football History's Game Changers, I want to review why I celebrate the Gridiron Mount Rushmore of innovation with 4 men from history: Camp, Stag, Warner, and Brown. We have their innovations and why we think they're the best, coming up for you in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history and a portal to sports history, as we have expanded and we are in the jersey section, going through all sports history, Sports Jersey Dispatch Podcast, jerseydispatch.com, as well as we are a co-producer on OrvilleMulligan.com. If you haven't checked any of those out yet, please do. We have some show notes that take you links there. Also on our website, Pigskin Dispatch, Jersey Dispatch, and OrvilleMulligan.com. And, if you have some feedback, we would sure love to hear about it. If anything on football or any of the sports history in relation to jerseys or uniforms or some great players or teams that you want to talk about, email us at pigskindispatch@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback and your comments. And make sure you follow us on Twitter at Pigskin Dispatch and our Facebook page, Pigskin Dispatch. And we have a lot to talk about each and every day. We're bringing you something new each and every day, and we'd hope that you would join our email subscription so you can learn what's going on all 3 websites, as well as the Sports History Network, where a couple dozen of my friends are talking about sports history all the time too. We have a great little network going there. But anything from the Pig Pen, it really shows up on our daily newsletter, which you get before 7 a.m. each and every day in your email inbox. And it's you can unsubscribe at any time too. So there's links in the show notes to do that. Also, we ask that you rate and review us on your podcast provider if possible. We know Apple Podcast does. I believe Spotify does too. Getting a good rating and any kind of rating really is helpful to the podcast, and it helps us become aware to others that maybe want to listen to this too. But those ratings really mean a lot. So we appreciate it if you would take the time to do that, as well as tell your friends and family about our podcast, Pigskin Dispatch and the Sports Jersey Dispatch, and OrvilleMulligan.com. Now, I told you I was blessed to talk about football every day. And the people I get to chat with and the books I read and most of my internet searches are on the topic of football history. And with this said, I get a lot of great looks on who is important to the game's evolution, from soccer and rugby all the way to the game of football we know today. Now, just look back to that famous 1869 game of Princeton and Rutgers, and the rules that they used were not anywhere near what we would call football today. It was a version of soccer cross-eyed with rugby a little bit, I think is what we would call it. Even the ball wasn't the right shape to what we're aware of today. And as I have said a few times in some of the most recent podcasts, I am convinced that the most basic fundamentals of what we know as football today was developed by 4 men in history. And I want to dedicate this edition of Game Changers on Pigskin Dispatch to these men: Walter Camp, Amos Alonzo Stagg, Pop Warner, and Paul Brown, the group that I will label as the football's Fantastic Four of innovation. And here's some of what each brought to the table of gridiron innovation, and see if you agree with me and let me know. Again, we want that feedback, pigskindispatch@gmail.com. Well, in this look, we got to start at the beginning with the man that really started to change in the very early stages of football, Walter Camp. And he really started the evolution of the game. And after all, he is called the father of American football, with good reason. We learned a lot about Camp's contributions when we interviewed author Roger Tamte back in 2021 on his great book on Walter Camp. These are some of the innovations that Camp has come up with. The line of scrimmage, setting a limit of 11 players to a side, a system of downs and yards to go. At first he had it 3 downs, 5 yards to go, much like the McGill College did when they played Harvard, and then he adapted that when it needed to in the early 20th century to 4 downs, 10 yards to go, as we know today. So he was involved both times with that. Player positions, especially the backs, including the quarterback, were named by Mr. Walter Camp. Signal calling by the quarterback, and the naming of the quarterback by for the sake. Special drills and exercises for players by position. Yeah, he gave each one of them their own exercises and drills to make them better at what their job was to do on the football field. Painted yard lines. Where would we be without those? It would just be a big blank thing of grass, with no boundaries. Many officiating techniques and positions, and he was the first man to publish a football rules book. Very interesting there. He took responsibility for many administrative aspects of the game from 1876 all the way through his death in 1925, and we talked about that quite a bit. He developed the All-America team with Casper Whitney, and he contributed that all the way to his death in 1925. He contributed to the development of the NCAA. We just covered that recently on Football History Rewind in 1907-1908 segments, where Camp was very instrumental in that organization. And he responded publicly to college officers criticizing the game. He increased the role of athletics in colleges, wrote books teaching football, many of them. He also wrote books that were fictional books on the game of football. I have a couple in my collection. Now, he wrote some informational newspaper articles preceding and after games, and he even had his own column in some newspapers and periodicals talking about football from time to time. And he developed an annual guide in about 1883 and continued to be involved in as an editor the rest of his life, containing the game's official rules, commenting on rule changes, reporting and commenting on various issues and events involving American football. And that is the Spalding Rules Book. And I have some of those in my collection of books as well, some of those early ones, including the 1925, the last edition that he contributed to. And what great... that's basically the basics of football. Well, you think it stops there? Well, how about another man? Amos Alonzo Stagg. We learned much about this great coach at the University of Chicago, the better part of 5 decades. Amos Alonzo Stagg, when we sat down with an author of a biography on him by Jennifer Taylor Hall called Amos Alonzo Stagg, Football's Man in Motion. What an excellent book that is as well. And Stagg was there almost at the beginning of football, we learned himself, as he played for Walter Camp at Yale in the 1880s. And he was also at the inception of another sport, basketball, when his friend and former mentor John Naismith developed the game in Springfield at the YMCA when they were both working there. And it's innovations that we salute Mr. Stagg for in this article. His contributions are many, too, as we learned when we talked to Jennifer Taylor Hall. The ends back formation, reverse plays, the first indoor game, an early book on football diagrams in 1893 with Minnesota's Henry Williams, the first intersectional game, contributions to the idea of snapping from center, a possible contributor to the idea of the onside kick. He created the huddle, the quick kick, a short punt, a spiral snap. He was a contributor alongside with Walter Camp and George Washington Woodruff and Germany Schultz on that subject. A line shift, lateral pass or pitch. He also contributed in the idea of a tackling dummy. Unbalanced line was his innovation. Varsity letters, he was the first to hand those out. The Statue of Liberty play. Uniform numbers, he was one of the first to use those in any sport, but especially football. The T formation contributor, forward pass contributor alongside with Eddie Kokums and Walter Camp. Pre-snap man in motion, that was his idea. The quarterback keeper, or the quarterback sneak. Linebacker position he helped develop. Hip pads, numerical designations of plays. The old 35 dive. Well, you can attribute that to the great Amos Alonzo Stagg. padded goalposts were another innovation. There's other numerous ones too as well. But you see these two men, they did quite a bit. That's basically the old time portion of the game where they really changed it from the game of rugby and put some new innovations in it. And we got a couple other gentlemen to talk about here, and we will do that right after this message.
Hey there, football fans. This is Ross, the host of the Pigskin Tales podcast. I just need a few moments of your time to talk about the host of the Pigskin Dispatch podcast, Darren Hayes. He's expanded the Pigpen to search out information on the history of all team sports. It's a quest to find out about the competitors, teams, and places chronicled throughout athletic history, through the uniforms and gear the participants used and wore. And he is taking you, the listener, with him on this educational journey to preserve sports history on the Sports Jersey Dispatch, found here on the Sports History Network. His newest podcast, called Jersey Dispatch, is all based on the jerseys that all the greats used to wear. You can find Darren Hayes and the Pigskin Dispatch podcast, as well as Jersey Dispatch, on your favorite podcast provider multiple times each week. So remember that, Darren Hayes, the host of the Pigskin Dispatch and Jersey Dispatch podcasts. It's found right here on the Sports History Network. The soundtrack is provided by Raphael Crux from filmmusic.io.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. That's Ross Bliley of the Pigskin Tales podcast here on Sports History Network. I really want to thank him for volunteering to help me out with doing that promo for Sports Jersey Dispatch. We really enjoy Ross's company and him helping out there. And that way you're not listening to my voice constantly, and we get a message about our other podcasts, so that's great. So now let's get back to those fantastic four innovators of football that I have. And we already talked about Walter Camp. We talked about Amos, Alonzo, Stagg. Well, another contemporary of those two men, coming up just a little bit after them, is Pop Warner. Now, we just had a great article and podcast on Pop Warner recently, but in review, Pop Warner is a name that is closely associated with youth football. The name is in his honor to the man not only founded the organization, but forever made his mark on the game we love, Pop Warner football. And let's take a look at some of the accomplishments of Glenn Scobee Warner, his real God-given name. To his credit, Coach Glenn Warner is responsible for such items in football as the three-point stance, the screen pass. He also helped develop the spiral punt, with Amos, Alonzo, Stagg, a naked bootleg play, a double reverse, the single wing formation, what we would call today the wildcat formation, but he had some different twists on it that's really unique. The double wing formation, we learned about both of those in that great Carlisle versus Army game 1912 that we just did recently. If you haven't listened to that two-part series on that game, based on a book by Lars Anderson, please take the time to do that because it's really interesting. A lot of history on Pop Warner. Some of the credit for modern day numbering players' jerseys is credited to the Pop Warner. The requirement of wearing shoulder pads by players and wearing thigh pads as well, as mandatory equipment for periods of time. I'm not sure if the thigh pads are anymore, but shoulder pads definitely are. Lightweight uniforms, we would be without those today. Safer helmets, the use of blocking sleds, and practicing with tackling dummies. We know that Amos, Alonzo, Stagg really did most of the innovation for the tackling dummies, but just some of the unique things of putting the tackling dummies on cables and such. And we've seen some pictures in some recent articles we've had of him having Jim Thorpe using the tackling dummy on a cable. And you're trying to hit a moving target without punishing his other players on the roster. Now, perhaps Pop Warner's biggest contribution to the game was the development of youth players and their preparation in the fundamentals of the game to be ready to take the higher levels of the gridiron to new places with the creation of the Pop Warner Leagues for Kids in 1929. Warner himself said this was his biggest achievement in football, and it definitely is. Pop Warner football is still around today, and we still associate that name. You may not know who Pop Warner was, but we know what Pop Warner football is, level for youngsters out there to play the great gridiron game. Now, our fourth of the Fantastic Four we talked about is more of a contemporary of ours. Many of us may remember him coaching a little bit. You know, I'm in my mid-50s. I remember a little bit about Paul Brown as an owner of the Cincinnati Bengals. Well, maybe even a little less about him coaching with the Cincinnati Bengals, but we know he was a great coach of the Cleveland Browns for years and years. Their very first coach in the AAFC in the mid-1940s and all the way through early 1960s. And you know, we learned that from Jonathan Knight in a 2021 interview we had with him on a book on Paul Brown. Also learned more about Paul Brown from historian George Bazika when we talked about the Massillon Tigers, you know, the high school football rivalry with the Canton Bulldogs. We learned how much Paul Brown was a great innovator in the high school level at Massillon, and also at Ohio State he won a national championship. Only man to win a high school championship, national championship in high school, national championship in college with Ohio State, and NFL title and an AAFC title. He had multiple football titles, all three levels of football. I don't know if anybody else has done that. Unbelievable. Well, some of the other innovations of Paul Brown, you know, was of hiring a full-time, all-around year coaching staff. You know, boy, where would we be without that right now? Hiring scouts to go over college talent. We take that for granted. It's done all the time. The idea of film study of his players, you know, that's fairly new, the last 70 years. He and his players studying in the classroom settings, you know, not just out on a football field, but they're studying the theory of football and the theory of how plays work. Sending plays in the huddle by shuttling guards in and out, you know, the old guard shuttle. And he was also the first to try a radio transmitter in a quarterback's helmet. Now, we just had that recently in the football history headlines, that great story of the gentleman that invented that and their secret with Paul Brown trying to test it and getting busted by the cops. If you haven't checked that out, do a search on Pigskin Dispatch up on our search box, the right side of the screen, and search on that radio transmitter and or Paul Brown, and you'll see it come up in the football history headlines from February. So just some great stories, some great talents, and that is my Mount Rushmore of football innovators. You know, Walter Camp, Amos, Alonzo, Stagg, Pop Warner, and Paul Brown. Those four heads I could see on any football mountain as being the ones that developed the game. And I think now you can see why I say that, and probably many others do as well. If you disagree or have somebody to add to that or somebody more deserving, I'd like to know. pigskindispatch@gmail.com. And we thank you for listening, and we hope you will listen once again tomorrow as we will bring you some more great football history as well as some great innovations of the game and some insight from the Pigpen. And we appreciate you here at Pigpen Sports, and we hope to hear from you very soon with your feedback. And until tomorrow, everybody, have a great Gridiron Day. That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandham at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.